Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Before we get started, I just want to make sure that everyone can see and hear us. So please let us know in the chat if you can hear us okay. Wait for people to check in. Awesome. We have some confirmation that people can hear us. So welcome everyone to our Project Destination Clark webinar. My name is Hazel Odell and I'm a current senior at Clark University, and I'm going to be hosting our conversation today. And for this session, which we're calling the Social Sciences, a faculty panel, we're focusing on the social sciences at Clark through the lens of some of our amazing faculty. So our panelists are looking forward to answering your questions on everything from their area of expertise to how they engage with students in the classroom. And before I have them introduce themselves, I do want to offer a couple of tips for using this technology, which in the webinar format is a little bit different than other Zoom conversations you might be a part of. So I do want to point out that you'll notice either at the bottom of your screen if you're on a PC, or at the top of your screen if you're on a Mac, you'll see both the Q&A and the chat features. And these two features have some different functions. So if you're having an issue with the technology that we're using, whether that's getting your messages to us or hearing us or seeing us, please use the chat feature to let us know. One of our admissions staff members, Natasha, is behind the scenes and will be happy to assist you through there. And if you have any questions that you'd like to ask of the panelists, please use the Q&A feature. We will be able to answer some questions live, and then we'll be able to answer some questions via text. And we appreciate your patience as we work to share the Clark experience with you. So there are a lot of you tuning in right now, so we want to apologize in advance if we don't make it to every single question or to your exact question. If we're unable to get to your question through tonight's webinar, or if you think of other questions towards the end or after we close out, you're invited to reach out to us through email, and our email is admissions@clark.edu. So we can get started now. I am joined here by three faculty panelists, Jackie Gagan, Nancy Budwig, and Mark Miller. So before I jump into some questions, could you each take a minute to tell us a little bit about yourselves and your role in the Clark community, please?
Since my name is first, I'll go first.
Awesome.
I'm Jackie Gagan. I'm chair of the economics department. My specialty is spatial and environmental economics, and I teach courses at the undergraduate level and in our graduate program.
Awesome, thank you. Maybe Nancy next.
Okay, I'll go next. My name is Nancy Budwig. I have an office just upstairs from Jackie Gagan, so it's appropriate that I'm sitting just on top of her here. I teach in the area of developmental psychology, and in particular in the area of student success and designing environments for students to succeed in academic settings. And I teach courses at the undergraduate, graduate level, including first-year seminars, pop courses, capstone, and a variety of graduate courses, all in the area of developmental psychology.
Thank you.
And I'm Mark Miller. I teach in the Department of Political Science. You should know that the Political Science Department has three distinct subfields. We offer American politics, comparative politics, and international relations. And I teach in the American politics subfield. I teach courses on U.S. judicial politics. I teach courses on U.S. constitutional law. And I have a capstone on lawyers and politics. I also teach some non-law related courses. I teach a course on the U.S. Congress, and I teach Intro to American Government, which is a course that attracts many first-year students. Also at Clark, I'm the director of an interdisciplinary minor in law and society, and I'm the university's pre-law advisor.
Awesome. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm glad that Professor Budwig brought up some of the types of courses at Clark. As we discuss social sciences at Clark, we will get in, before we start, I will get into what a couple of those acronyms mean. But again, feel free to submit your questions as they come throughout the webinar. And again, please use the Q&A section to ask your questions, otherwise we will not see them. So before we get started, I want to explain some of these Clark-specific terms about academics that might come up during the panel. So the first term that I want to discuss is LEAP. So that's L-E-E-P, and LEAP stands for Liberal Education and Effective Practice. And it's important to understand that the Clark academic experience is rooted both in the liberal arts as well as in hands-on experimental learning. So the intentional combination of these two elements prepare our students for any number of careers that they might enter after their time at Clark. The second term is FYI, which stands for First Year Intensive, and that's a type of course that all first-year students are required to take in their first semester. It's typically limited to about 16 students, and it's a chance for students to start off their Clark career by developing a close relationship with a professor and a group of peers who share their interests. So your FYI professor will most likely be your academic advisor until you declare your major, and they'll also help you navigate your transition from high school to college. The next term I want to talk about is PLS, which stands for the Program of Liberal Studies, and PLS courses comprise Clark's core curriculum. So PLS courses strengthen students' communication and critical thinking skills and enable them to build knowledge in essential areas, including history, the natural sciences, and language and culture. Additionally, students expand their intellectual horizons, explore potential career paths, and refine their interests through these courses. The last type of course I want to talk about is a POP, or Problems of Practice course. And these are courses that are hands-on experiences that take place within the academic context. So students have the chance to work to investigate complex questions that have a significance beyond the borders of the campus and that classroom environment. So a lot of POP courses enable students to work side by side with faculty, graduate students, alumni, and other experts at the local or global organizational level. This could include theater groups, historical societies, media outlets, all the way to government agencies, Fortune 500 companies, or NGOs. One more type of course that is important to mention is the capstone. So every Clark student will complete a LEAP capstone in their major, either independently or as a part of their group, This usually happens during their senior year, sometimes their junior year. So this endeavor involves advanced work that addresses a specific issue, problem, or theme in a specific field or in the world. And the capstone can take the form of a thesis or a project, and that's always in consultation with a faculty advisor who will help the student to define and carry out that project on their own initiative. So now that I've gone over some of those terms that might come up, I'm going to finally start asking our panelists some questions. So to start off, I'm going to start with a three-part question that each of you can answer. And that includes, can you tell us a little bit more about your area or areas of expertise? Have you taught classes that are directly related to your research? And could you give an example of one or two of these classes and give us an idea of what was taught in them? So perhaps Professor Geoghegan wants to start again.
I think we should go in alphabetical order sometime.
Oh, that sounds great.
Yeah, I want to see what Nancy says. So let's go Nancy first, please.
Yeah. You want me to go first?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Okay, because I know what you're
Show me how to do it.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll start with my area of expertise, as I mentioned, is human development and learning, and especially at times of transition. So this does play out in some of my courses. For example, I teach a first-year intensive on education and effective practice, in which students learn and read about the literature about student success and are learning some writing skills, but they're also involved in frontline research on this very topic. And I think this is just one example of the ways from the get-go students are being given the broad liberal arts inquiry-based skills, as well as some of the fundamental research experiences that allow them to really sharpen their skill sets, and they work collaboratively on that.
Awesome. Thank you. We can move on to Professor Miller.
Sure. I have basically 3 areas of research, and all of them end up in my classes in some way. One area of research is on lawyers who are elected members of legislatures and other lawyer politicians. So I study the legal profession, but more specifically, those lawyers who get themselves elected to political office. A second area I look at in judicial politics is I'm really interested in the interactions between Congress and the federal courts. And so I've done a lot of research on that area. And thirdly, I'm interested in constitutional law issues. My field, many of us publish both articles and books. You'll find that in some fields it's mostly articles, some fields it's mostly books. My field, it's both. And I actually use books that I've authored in some of my classes. So for instance, I have a book, my capstone seminar, which is for seniors, college seniors, remember. My college seniors read 14 books, and one of them is mine on the role of lawyers in legislatures. But they also read books about lawyers who practice divorce law, or they read a book about law school, they read a book about conservative lawyers and politics, they read a book about progressive lawyers and politics, they read a book about judges. I think you get the point. Another in my judicial politics class, which studies things like selection systems for judges and also looks at trial courts and criminal trials and civil trials, as well as appellate courts like the US Supreme Court. My students actually use 2 of my books. I have a textbook in this area that my students use, and I have a reader, which is a collection of chapters by various scholars around the country in this field. And so my students get to read my own writings. They also get to hear a lot about my research, and I'm able to combine teaching and research in a way that I think my students like, and I certainly enjoy greatly.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. So we've got some questions rolling in.
We need Professor Geoghegan first. We don't want to skip over her. Sorry, Hazel.
I am so sorry. My order was messed up. Go ahead, Professor Geoghegan. I'm so sorry.
Sorry, Hazel. So I'm an agricultural economist with specialty in environmental economics. And my specific area of research since coming to Clark, and one of the things that drew me to Clark in 1996 was spatial analysis. So spatial environmental analysis, I do a lot of work with the Graduate School of Geography. And so that's what brought me to Clark. And the reason I stayed at Clark all these years is because of my colleagues and my students. So one of the courses that I teach is an elective in economics. I call it Not Your Mother's Home Economics, the Economics and Policy of Food. And in that course, I've got a mix of students, undergrads, sophomores, juniors, and seniors, as well as graduate students who are working with me on their dissertation. And the topics that we cover each time I teach the class kind of depends on who the graduate student is and designing new research projects that the undergrads work with the graduate student. And it's a real world local food issue. So the students are doing research, the graduate students doing research. It's a multi-generational learning community, and that's been a very fun topic, fun course to teach, and that's all I got for you right now.
That's a great start. Thank you all so much. So to start off with a question that I think would be great for Professor Budwig, someone has asked about what you think makes the psychology program at Clark different from psychology programs at other universities.
All right. Well, let me start out and say my office is right up there. I'm actually not at Clark right now, but is a background that I picked out because it is a very distinctive part of Clark that the psychology building overlooks the campus green, which at this time of year, if you were able to visit, is really distinctive and fun. It really tells a lot about the character of the campus. So I'm sorry you won't get to see that today. But really, in all seriousness, two things I think that are distinctive about our department have to do with the fact that we're both a PhD granting department and based in a liberal arts-based research university, and take both of those incredibly seriously. And that's certainly a draw for almost, I would say, for every faculty member who is there, that we get this opportunity to work with all of the creative undergraduate students and work with the doctoral students as well. I'd say a second thing has to do with the opportunities that actually go beyond the psych department, and that we're small enough to really take advantage of them. So one of the things that many of us in the psych department have done is take advantage of the interdisciplinary concentrations and research centers on campus, as well as the Maine South community, which surrounds us. And so these have become opportunities for our students, as well as for our teaching and for our research. So because of the scale of the department, it's relatively small. And as many of you know, psych departments around the country are often almost as big as the Clark faculty in total. We really are able to branch out and provide opportunities, co-teaching and other opportunities to bring expertise in to our students and draw upon other disciplines, whether it be the sciences or the humanities. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. So moving on to a question that I think would be great. A question that is about research opportunities, internship opportunities, and in general, hands-on opportunities offered in the political science department. Professor Miller, maybe you could talk a little bit about what those hands-on opportunities look like in that department.
Sure, happy to. First thing I want to say is, unlike my friends, Professor Budwig and Professor Geoghegan, my department is an undergraduate-only department. So we have no PhD. So at Clark, there's a mixture. Some departments are non-graduate. Other departments have masters and bachelors. Other departments have PhD and bachelors. It's really a mix, which is why we're a liberal arts research university. Let me say, in internships and that kind of thing, let me start with that. As the pre-law advisor, not surprisingly, a lot of my students are pre-law students. Worcester is a great place for pre-law students because we have no law school in the city. So our students are able to get internships in Worcester that they would not be able to get where they're competing directly with law students. So a lot of my students intern at the district attorney's office or at the public defender's office on the criminal law side. Some of my students intern for the ACLU. Others intern for legal services, offices that provide services for disadvantaged people. Some intern directly with the court. I have some of my students who have interned with the Massachusetts District Court, and they help people navigate some of the paperwork and other things that need to be done in court setting. On the political side, in Worcester, many of my students intern for the local congressman. Congressman McGovern happens to be the chair of the House Rules Committee, which is a very, very important committee in Congress. He tends to hire a lot of interns for his Worcester office. He also hires interns in his Washington, D.C. office. So our students can intern in Worcester in a variety of political and legal settings. They can also, we have Washington, D.C. programs where one of my students was an intern at the Supreme Court of the United States, or they could intern at the United Nations in New York, or they can do a variety of things locally and globally. And so our students have a lot of different interns and hand-on opportunities. both in Worcester during the regular semester, in London during some of our study abroad programs, in DC for our study away programs, or in the summers at other times, we can support internships and other things around the globe.
Awesome. Thank you very much. On to the next question. This one, it would be great if each of you could talk a little bit about what the problems of practice or POP classes look like in your discipline, and maybe give a couple of examples of those.
I can start out. So problems of practice courses in our department typically involve second semester sophomores, juniors, and I teach one that I teach is on program evaluation. Turns out when we really looked at our majors, we realized that a lot of our students want to go on and work in the nonprofit sector or education, and they have a lot of creative ideas about ideas that they want to bring into those organizations, and a skill set that they might need to have to really work successfully in those organizations would be to be able to do program evaluation and see if their great ideas are working. So in that course, we work on a national program evaluation, or one stemming from the Maine South area where there's a local organization that has contacted me through a bid that I do, and the students work on that. And in addition, we then have students working on a proposal for a project, because that situates them well as they start thinking about taking advantage of some of the summer fellowship opportunities that are available at Clark, and gives them something of a rough draft for that. A second kind of course would be, for example, there's a yearly meeting up at the State House through our Mazakowski Institute. One of the professors in our department has taught a POP course where the students intern and help the guest speakers who have to do translational research presentations for State House people actually distill the research into manageable units, and the undergraduates learn about policy implications of research. So those are two examples. And as Mark Miller explained, our department has three types of programs. We have a clinical program, a social track, and a developmental track. And developmental psychology students take breadth requirements and all, and then they can specialize in an area. And I just want to be transparent. There's a very common question people write in. I don't know if anybody has asked this, but there is no possibility for undergraduates to get experience, direct experience in any of the kind of direct counseling that goes on with clinical psychology, though they can be set up for other kinds of internships. Anybody else?
Let's jump in next.
Sure, I can jump in. So we have in the political science department, we're offering a problems of practice course on civil discourse on university campuses. So we're looking in that course, which I don't teach, but my colleagues teach. They're looking at different ways, issues of free speech and civil discourse, and how can people bridge differences in the way they discuss topics with each other within a political framework at the setting of universities across the country. And that's one of our POP courses.
Awesome. Great example.
All right, so in economics, so we haven't officially named anything a problems of practice course yet, but I'm going to for the food course that I mentioned, right? So the last time I taught the class, this time last year, I added our big research, real world problems of practice thing was on craft brewing of beer in New England. So it was something that I was interested in personally, and as far as economics goes, the incredible explosion in craft brewing has been phenomenal, right? So it's really interesting market to study. So worked with, so we've got some Clark alums in Worcester who there's a brewery called Three Cross. So the students, we had a field trip to it, did a lot of analysis of what causes a brewery to open and agglomeration effects, all sorts of things. So, so having conversations with, real people in the real world, asking them what they need help with and understanding is kind of my approach to doing that in economics.
Great, thank you.
And Hazel, if I could jump in, sorry to interrupt you, Hazel. One
No,
other
go
thing
ahead.
I forgot to mention, which is very important, I think, for hands-on work, we have an intercollegiate mock trial team who competes with other universities across New England and across the country, and that's practical experience for a lot of our pre-law students. We also have a Model United Nations team that competes with teams from around the world. And both of those teams are highly successful at Clark.
Thank you. It's definitely helpful. I think a lot of my friends in the political science department get a lot of value out of those programs in the extracurricular sense. So moving on a little bit to talk a little bit more broadly about academic experiences, to fuse two questions together, how easy is it for students to switch majors? And obviously that can look very different at different points in students' 4 years at Clark, but how easy would it be to switch majors? And then also as a major, as someone who's focusing on something in the arts or something in the sciences, what can students learn from the social sciences that might contribute to their other areas of study?
So, can I jump in?
Yeah, please.
So our introductory econ class, Econ 10, Economics in the Global Society or something is its name, Econ 10, about half of the first year class takes at Clark. And I personally think it should be 100%, right? Because understanding how the economy works and how individuals make choices in markets is incredibly important, and especially given what's happening now, right? So,
yeah. Just to jump in about what I've experienced, I have done first year intensives for 3 years in a row. That means that I've had 3 cohorts of about 16 students. And through the advising mentorship that we all get, most of us are setting our students up to test out a few things. At Clark, you can proceed along, and many of our students also do a minor or a concentration, which is an interdisciplinary. So we set the students up to be meeting their program of liberal studies requirements. So for the first couple years, in fact, I would rephrase the question. We're trying to keep our students open, at least as somebody who's part of the largest major. I love it when people come and say they want to major in psych, but I also want to make sure that they've heard about fields that they may not have been presented with in high school to test those out. So I would say in the first couple of years, it's very easy, and except with some exceptions. I'd say in the social sciences, it's easier, for example, than in the sciences, where there's a lockstep sequence that you have to do. So the advising really plays a key role there, and students check in with their advisors. They keep in touch with other upperclassmen about that. So early on, with regard to the second part, I would say it's kind of a signature feature of my experience over 30 plus years at Clark. What I love about advising is listening to the different ways students put combinations together. So just today, I had a student who likely will major in biochem. She's a first year student with a studio art background she's considering pursuing, and another one who wants biology and history. So they're quite broad in terms of what they want, and it's our job to help them think realistically. Now, there also was one student who I spoke to yesterday. He wants to do a double major, a concentration, and a minor. That struck me as perhaps something that he might want to think twice about over the summer and see where he's at next year in year 2. But there is a certain amount of fluidity in the first year or two as students test out. and definitely a lot of students who cross, not only across the disciplines, but the different areas. And one of the reasons I know this is one of my research areas looks at what students' intended major is and secondary choices at colleges and universities that are part of the sample that I and my students work on. And one of the things that we are interested in is, do students stay, say, with a double major within the social sciences, or do they branch out? And I think it's a sign of our times that many students, especially if they're thinking about something in the humanities, pick a social science or a science second major or concentration to work with, just to cover their bases.
Sure, and if I could jump in, students at Clark do not have to declare a major until the end of their sophomore year. So some of them will know right off the bat exactly what they want to do. And if they want to be a biochemistry major, it's probably a good idea to know sooner rather than later. But because students can declare their major at the end of the sophomore year, I get a lot of students in the pre-law program who maybe started out pre-med, wanted to be a natural science major. Then they often decide, no, that's not exactly what I want. Maybe they'll major in the social sciences, minor in the natural sciences, or something like that. So there's a lot of ability to change at Clark. And as my colleagues have said, a lot of students put together very interesting things. I was in the new world, we're Zoom meeting with my students instead of meeting face to face. I was on a Zoom meeting yesterday with a history major who's a biology minor who wants to do what we call a concentration, but I call an interdisciplinary minor in law and society. And she had it all mapped out and it worked fine for her. I also had a student a few years ago. He was a first-year student at the time. He came into my office and he said, I know I want a PhD at some point in my life, but I don't know if I want it in physics or in politics. And I said, well, major in physics, minor in politics. And what he did was stay for the 5th year at Clark, get a master's of teaching. He was originally from California, went out and taught at a elite boarding school in LA area, and then ended up getting a PhD eventually in political sociology. So I guess my point is people change their mind a lot of times, but they put together very interesting things, which is really exciting about Clark students.
Hazel, if I can just follow up with something. So one of the reasons I mentioned that so many first-year students take the introductory econ course is that it's required for many majors, such as Mark's major, poli-sci, business, etc. So a lot of students are coming in for that. And then it's also a course that satisfies one of the requirements for the PLS that you mentioned earlier. So students show up in that class because it, ticks off different boxes for them. But then some of them discover they actually like economics, right? So we have many students who are double majors in sort of obvious things like political science and economics, or minors in management. But many students, cross, environmental science and economics, studio art and economics. So that's what is great, is that students are interesting, and we're able to offer this and support them, and it's great.
Yeah, thank you all. I think that's really helpful. And our next question is actually kind of bouncing off of the advising experiences that you all have talked about, and the kind of conversations that you're often having with students about what areas of study they should move toward, and what options might be available to them they don't know about coming in. So I was wondering if maybe one or a couple of you could talk a little bit more about how you would advise a student who's entering Clark as an undecided major, and perhaps like what kind of questions they should ask themselves when they're figuring out what courses to take in their first couple of semesters at Clark.
I'll jump in here. In fact, part of the first year intensive program has actually been designed around this question. So in their first year, students are actually encouraged to go and test out an office hour of professors in a few different departments and just even ask basic questions like, what is this major? I've never heard of it. And, look at on the web and then ask a few questions. So one of the things that we encourage students to do is to use some of their early courses in the program of liberal studies to find out about different areas. I would say advising is fairly intense at Clark. That's been my experience. I don't know if students feel it that way, but we really encourage students to get outside their comfort zone early on. I know I've had students who would prefer to go to the program of liberal studies courses that they have already done AP work in. And I really encourage them, for example, to try out something, whether it be a language or a science course or that GP that Jackie was talking about that I know will serve them well early on, and just try it out. And some of them find that it's very helpful for shaping their interests, both of what they like and what they don't like. And they come back and they talk with their advisors about that. And they might like certain aspects, and in talking with them, we can send them on to another place. They also talk a lot to their peers as well.
And if I could jump in on this one, for pre-law students, I always tell them it doesn't matter what their major is. They can go to law school with any major. They should follow their passions. And maybe they know what their passion is coming in, and maybe they don't. In addition to the pre-law students, I also work with a fair number of varsity athletes. And I've been a summer advisor for varsity athletes the last couple summers. And I tell them, I know you're passionate about your sport, but I bet you're also passionate about other things. And the first year is a perfect time to explore. I'm as happy if a student says, oh, I tried something and I don't like it. Well, that's okay. It's nice to know what you don't like, as well as to find what you do like. And I think Clark allows people to follow whatever their passions are.
Great. Thank you. I think that's summed it up pretty well. Definitely matches up with my experience as a student. And have time for a couple more questions. So a quick one to move on to is this, of course, will be different in different departments and year to year. But generally speaking, maybe for each of your departments, how much do course offerings vary, and how often are new courses introduced?
I'm happy to jump in. In political science, things change quickly. So we often have new courses that arrive, or classes that we try and say, does it work? But we also have a lot of very stable classes in our department. So we offer Intro to American Government, Intro to International Relations, Intro to Comparative Politics every semester. And so those classes are quite stable. Some of the classes, like I teach a constitutional law class every year. There are two of them I alternate between civil rights and civil liberties. One year, government powers, the other year. Those are quite stable. But next fall, we're offering a course on cyber law in my department. And I don't know if that will be a one-time only thing or if it will come back regularly. We're also offering a course in my department on comparative courts. Again, I don't know if that's a one-time course or if that's something that will come back. So we have a mixture of current topics type courses and courses that we offer every semester.
I would say that's precisely how we do it in psychology. There's a set of core courses that are offered every single semester and all students take. And then in terms of the electives, and we try and have for the different interest areas broadly construed for the students who are following those tracks. But there'll be a special interest course that perhaps is very timely and that may rotate in. And then we sometimes trade every other year so that students can pick either their junior or their senior year, which is usually when they're taking those elective courses.
I say it's the same in economics, right? There's the core that everyone has to know, and then the electives we have flexibility with. So if a faculty member has a new passion, let's develop a course around it, or we hire somebody new, or something comes up now. The field of economics, is moving in a particular direction, and we have to move with it, right, to keep our students, up to date and knowing what's going on.
Thanks. Something I even would like to add to that is that there's a good number of students who in different departments can design their own concentrations in their department, and the courses that they take even for their major might not necessarily be limited to that major. As an international development major myself, I have economics courses that have served my major, courses in the education department and political science. So there's a lot of openness even within a particular student's major to interact with different departments. So we have time for, I think, probably 2 more questions. The first one that I want to answer is for students who are trying to decide between an undergraduate-only institution and Clark, which has graduate and psychology programs. As we mentioned, what is the benefit of going to a school that has graduate students? And I think we've talked about this a little bit already with the kind of opportunities that students can have to work with graduate and graduate students. So maybe you could all talk about how you, for those of you who are in departments that have graduate and PhD programs, how do you balance your focus between undergraduate and graduate students?
So one of the benefits of having a doctoral program in economics is that we have TAs in all of our core courses who are doctoral students, right? So it's a wonderful bridging mechanism, especially for first-year undergrads coming in, that they have a mentor who is closer to them in age and might be more, the student might think they're more approachable, right? So that's helpful, I think, for them. And then, as I said, graduate students are working on their dissertations, so they're helping to model how you do research with the undergrads. So I think it's just another level of support and interest and a way of students thinking about, oh, that could be me in 6 years.
And just to flip the question around a little bit, I want to pick up on something Mark said earlier. I think if a student is considering research universities versus undergraduate universities, in many ways for the undergraduate experience in psychology, Clark is going to map on more similarly to the undergraduate focused liberal arts based schools that they're looking at. One should be really cautious. And what I mean by that is I definitely see the graduate students can be an asset, but in terms of that whole question of dividing the time, I actually think the undergraduates are a value added to my graduate students' programming, and that the experience the undergraduates have is pretty similar to that they have in the undergraduate-only departments. I mean, there is that possibility that the rare student can petition to be in those graduate level only courses, which might not be a possibility elsewhere. But I would say the faculty and their teaching styles and their commitment is intensely strong for the undergraduate students. And I do agree with Jackie that multi-generational kind of mentoring that goes on, where an undergraduate student has both a more senior level undergraduate and maybe some graduate students, as well as a faculty member and sometimes a postdoc. That's a wonderful learning experience. But I would say for the bulk of the experience in the psych department, the undergraduate, the feel of the major and the opportunities and all are definitely very focused on the undergraduate learning experience and the learning of outcomes that we've established for those students.
And again, my department has no graduate students, but one of the things about Clark that might be different than some liberal arts colleges where there are no graduate students at all is there is a strong emphasis on undergraduate research at Clark. So students can do independent studies with us. I had a student who did an independent study a year ago, I guess, looking at how different abortion interest groups on both sides of the question, how they lobbied state legislatures versus how they lobbied state courts. And I had another student who was from Puerto Rico, and she did an independent study with me on constitutional law cases affecting the American island territories over history. And so our students can get to do a lot of individual research. Sometimes high school students don't think about research in the same way we do, but if a student has an individual passion, faculty will work with them and we can find a way for them to follow whatever their research puzzle is, and we'll work with them. That's true at a lot of liberal arts colleges, but not all of them. So I think liberal arts colleges do a very good job, but we also have this research component. Our faculty are research active, and so are many of our students.
Great. Thank you all so much. It's about time for us to sign off, but I do have one final question. So for our faculty members, as many of our audience members are on the verge of their college experience, could you each give one final piece of advice to the viewers?
All right, I'm going to go first
Awesome.
because my oldest precious darling is on this call too because she's an admitted student to Clark. So I'm going through this with all of you. So do I have advice? My advice is to come to Clark because, you know, Mara's going to be here and I'm here and my fabulous colleagues are here. So that's my only piece of advice.
All right.
I guess my piece of advice is find the place that is right for you. And Clark is right for very many people, but it's not always right for everybody. Before I taught at Clark, I taught at The Ohio State University. When I was there, it merely had 55,000 students on its Columbus campus. And I can tell you that students who would thrive at Ohio State would not like Clark, and students who thrive at Clark would not like Ohio State. So you've got to find the right place for you. And again, Clark is the right place for a lot of people. And it's the right place to find whatever it is that you want to do. But find what works in your life.
And for me, I think what I would say is if there's anything to be taken from this COVID situation, if you remain healthy and all, and I hope you do, is we've stepped a little bit outside of that whole frenzy of which college and finishing up the courses and all that, and sit back and really spend a little time preparing yourself for all the independence that you'll hit upon when you arrive on campus. You know, you're not necessarily going to have a ton of people helping you get out of bed in the morning and motivating you to do that work. And you've been given a challenge here to be a little more independent in your learning. And if you frame that right, you actually are going to end up at whatever college you choose, and we all hope it's Clark, all the more ready to succeed here. So remember, in college, at least at Clark, Quizlet is not going to work. That's like the number one thing my first year intensive students learn. I didn't even know what Quizlet was when they told me that last year. So the point is that really use this as an opportunity to develop some skill sets of independence and being able to self-direct your learning to prepare you for the substantial opportunities that are waiting for you should you come to Clark.
Thank you all so much. I'm going to throw in my own piece of advice that I would give in at the end of a tour regularly, which is that I think the more current students and just other members of the communities that you're considering joining are the best source of information for learning about that campus community. So taking advantage of all of the virtual ways that we're working on doing that, throughout this college search right now, I think is the most helpful. I have been very successful over my years at Clark with cold emailing professors who I just found their bios online. I think you can see that our professors would be happy to engage with you. And as you can see on the page, we also have a couple more webinars coming up over the next couple of weeks, which can be found through the admitted students page. Again, I just wanted to thank Professor Geoghegan, Professor Budwig, and Professor Miller for answering all of those questions and sharing their experience with us. We hope that you had the chance to learn a little bit more about the social sciences at Clark. And based on what you've told us, we do have those few more Project Destination Clark events coming up. You can go to clarku.edu/admitted/webinars for the full list. And our next webinar will be about Worcester and its influence on the Clark experience, and that will be April 6th at 3:00 p.m. Eastern Time. So again, thank you all for tuning in. We had a lot of fun answering your questions, and we encourage you to get in touch if we can help answer any other questions that were answered today or that come up afterward. So until then, have fun, stay healthy, and take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.